Sometimes I think a moment of peace and quiet, and that is so nice. And there are other times I think, I wish somebody else was here to share this experience. Both times occur when I'm alone, but are two very different feelings. And studies are showing, and anecdotal evidence suggests, and most of us know, that many of us spend way too much time in the second category of, I wish someone else was here to share this with. In fact, the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy, said that 1 in 2 adults in America are living with measurable levels of loneliness. And among younger people, that is even higher. One of the things I found most interesting about the survey that the Surgeon General did is that loneliness is a subjective feeling. He says that loneliness occurs when the human connections that we feel we need are less than the connections that we have. And I thought that was pretty profound, because sometimes we can be surrounded by lots of people, but we don't feel connected. Loneliness occurs when the connections that we feel we need are less than the connections than we have. And I think that's helpful, because some of us are extroverts and some of you are introverts. And what looks like loneliness to me might be heaven to you. So it's very subjective. So this morning, our Advent topic is moving from being disconnected towards feeling connected. So now we're going to watch the 4th of our Advent videos.
Welcome into the Harbor Cove podcast. As many of you already know, we've been doing a series of interviews with real people from our community who have been in one particular place in their life, and through Jesus' power, they've been transformed and their lives have changed. He's brought them to a better place. So today, we have our friend Chase in here. He's going to share his story.
Chase?
So welcome, Chase.
Thanks for having me.
Chase, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm in 10th grade, just turned 16 a few weeks ago. I go to Gig Harbor High School, and I got a few friends. Started coming to church around, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago.
Tell us a little bit about your faith journey. So separate from church, what about your personal kind of relationship with Jesus or connection to the gospel or any of that?
First kind of started out when I first went to church. I didn't really know who God was. And then after that, kind of got disconnected from him and people in the church. I feel like during that disconnectedness, I had a bunch of friends, but they were all going to church. They were all either in some religion or another. And I felt connected to them, but I didn't feel connected on like a deeper level.
So you feel like maybe the relationships were a bit shallow.
Yeah, that's exactly how I put it. I was feeling something that I was missing. There were all these guys that just, it looked like they had their whole life figured out. They had their spiritual journey going up, and I'm just sitting here thinking, what am I missing?
What was a turning point for you? I mean, you had friends who were going to church. Eventually you started coming to church, but was it like immediately as soon as you showed up at Harbor Cove, your whole life turned around, or was there some moment in time where things really got serious for you?
After the second year, when I was in maybe 6th grade, it started becoming more part of my life, more serious, because I felt like I could be more vulnerable and express myself in the church.
So you kept going to church, but you said one of the big turning points for you was Unite.
Yeah.
What happened at Unite spiritually for you that made this a more like a good growth point for you?
So Unite was, as you guys know, there was a convention in San Diego. There were a lot of churches there. So I feel like it was a major turning point because I hadn't really hung out with people that were different from me but still enjoyed the same faith as me. They were from everywhere. They were from Iowa. They were from Alaska. There was a lot of churches and everybody was just there. And they're all very passionate about just Christianity and God. We just were so into everything that we did that was just involving ourselves with God. And there are also so many opportunities to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable. If there's an open door, you should take it. If there's something that's pushing you to just come to church, try and find something with God. If you're thinking about doing baptism, or if you're thinking about just coming to church, I'd suggest you talk it over with people that are around you and just try it out. Why not?
Give Faith Community a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Chase, thanks again so much for sitting down and talking with us. I've loved your story about how God has taken you from being disconnected to in faith to being connected to himself and to other people, all because you have made yourself open to opportunities. And if you are watching this and you would like to take an opportunity as well, you can visit harborcove.church. Right on the homepage, there's a lot of different options to maybe take your next step. If you would like to hear more of Chase's story, we are releasing this whole podcast at harborcove.church/podcast, or you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. Check it out.
So super grateful, again, for people who are willing to share their faith story with the rest of us, because it gives us all a place to kind of hang our experiences on, too. And it's so cool that Chase found this a place to belong. And when he felt welcome here, that's when he began to develop a relationship with Jesus. There's been this major shift over the past, 10, 15 years. It used to be that when it came to church, that the idea was that you had to believe in order to belong. And what we're finding is that people are so hungry for genuine relationships, from the opportunity to be vulnerable, to be known, like Chase was talking about, that the greatest thing that we can offer people is the opportunity to belong. And then once they have an opportunity to belong, lots of times that's when they come to some sort of faith. So there's so many opportunities for the church because of where our culture is. But we want to make sure that our response is rooted in God and God's actions. And so for that, I want to take us to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14 today. It's another one of the happy Isaiah passages, so it will be very, very familiar to you, especially during this Advent and Christmas time. Isaiah writes, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." So super familiar, but did you ever stop and wonder what the whole sign part of it was? I mean, we're used to the virgin will conceive, but what's the whole thing about the sign? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. So there's going to be this baby who's born, and his name is going to be Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. And that's why we're looking at the passage. What does it mean that God is with us? Well, a couple things. Obviously, when God promises a sign, he does it big. I mean, a virgin having a baby will get most of our attention. But then what the baby is named is equally amazing. The baby is named God is with us. Now, names tell us something. I mean, I remember when Megan and I were first having our kids, or having our first kid. We went through the whole naming thing, and I would have this name, and this is the perfect name, and she'd be like, no, I sat next to a guy in second grade, and I hated him. I could never call my kid that. Even though names don't have the same sort of meaning, we all have associations with them. But back in the Old Testament, they actually meant something. And Isaiah has two sons, and God named them. So the first son, God named Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz, which means quickly to the plunder, quickly to the plunder. And if that wasn't a good enough name that rolled off the tongue, he named the second kid Shair Yashub, which means the remnant will remain. But it gets better, because the prophet Hosea also had two kids. One of them was named Lo-Ami, which is, God gave them that name, which means you are not my people. And then he had a sister, and God named her Lo-Ruhamah, which means I do not pity you at all. Oddly, these have not remained popular baby names. People have gone with Noah and Hannah instead. So names mean something. So God is sending this baby, and God names him God with us. So that's important. Now, this is a very familiar passage, and we have a tendency to read it through New Testament eyes. We know, because we read this passage at Christmas, that ultimately it's referring to Jesus. But I want to take several steps back, because in the context, it has an even richer meaning. And there's a lot there, but we can't go into it all. So here's what the sign is. So as we've talked a number of times, Israel is always in conflict with somebody. I mean, they're sandwiched between the two great superpowers of the day, between Egypt and Babylon/Syria and whoever else happens to be over there at the time. And so they're constantly being torn back and forth. They have really lousy political leadership, and so there's always something going on that's politically different. 3% of the people have all of the money, 97% of the people live in grinding poverty, and so there's just always something that is tearing at the fabric of society. And at this particular point in time, there is a large army that is ready to come in and sweep the people away. And so the king appeals to God, and God says, "You can trust me. Don't worry about this. I know it looks bad. I know it looks like you're going to get wiped off the face of the earth, but don't worry about this. I've got this." And he could see in the king's eyes that the king did not believe him. So God says, "Go ahead. Ask for a sign." And the king said, "Oh, no, I couldn't do that," which sounds very faith-filled, but basically what the king was saying is, I can't trust that you're going to do this because there's this huge army. I don't know if you noticed that. And God said, "Well, this is slightly frustrating because I asked you to ask me for a sign, so I'm going to give you a sign anyway." That's where this comes in. And the sign is that a virgin's going to conceive and have a son. All this because I want you to know you can trust me. I'm going to give you a sign whether you want it or not. And the sign is, I'm trustworthy. And even though there's an army out there and it looks like you're going to lose, I promise I've got you because I will be with you. That's why the name is so important. So the context is that God comes into the reality of our lives. God comes into the mess. And God says to the king at the time, I will be in the difficult time with you. When you feel overwhelmed, I am with you. When you feel like all the odds are against you, I am with you. When you feel like you cannot handle it yourself, you don't have to, because my name is I am with you. But let's step back just a little bit further. Let's go back another 1,400 years, because there's this great story in the second book of the Bible, the book of Exodus, which talks about when God brings his people out of captivity in Egypt, and he uses Moses to do it. And there's this great story in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses is out wandering around in the desert watching his father's sheep and probably has heat stroke, and he sees a bush that is burning, and he goes over and the bush starts to talk to him, which, trust me, even 1,200 years ago was weird. And so, Moses, the bush speaks to him, and the bush says, I'm your God, and I have a job for you to do. And the job is for you to go in with just a staff and confront the greatest military might on the planet. You're going to walk in, and you're going to talk to the most powerful person on earth, and you're going to take your staff, and you're going to go, let my people go. And Moses is like, that ain't happening. That's crazy talk. And so God keeps talking him into it, and God gets frustrated with him too, and he offers him a sign, and Moses doesn't take it, so God gives it to him anyway. And finally, in the negotiations, Moses says to God, okay, but I don't even know who you are. I don't even know what your name is. What is your name? Because somebody's going to ask me, what God is it that sent you? And God says something very confusing. He says, and I have a picture of it, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This is the tattoo on Jonathan Montahano's arm. And I love the fact that he has it. And when there are pictures of it, I'm like, Johnny, just show me your tattoo. That's so much better. What this means is nobody's really sure. It's translated, usually is translated, I am who I am, or I am that I am. But if you put this name into context, this is what most theologians believe God says his name is. I am the God who will be with you. So Moses is in another situation where he is up against more than he could handle. And he's like, God, I can't do this. You have something for me, but you have to reveal who you are if you're going to send me out into this thing. And God says, my name is, I will be with you. And that's the tradition that Emmanuel picks up on. God promised at the very beginning, I am the God who will be with you through the difficult times. When we get to the people of Israel needing a sign, God says, I'm going to send a baby as a sign, and the baby's name is going to be, I will be with you. And then if you go all the way to the other end of the Bible, to the book of Revelation, in Revelation 21, almost to the very end, you get this picture of where we're headed. And in this picture, there's a new heaven and a new earth, and the new earth comes and is here, and God descends, and Revelation says, and God will be with us. So there's this thread from the beginning of the Bible, through the Exodus, through the covenant, through Jesus, all the way to the end, that God over and over and over says to his people, I'm the God who will be with you during the good times and during the bad times. So we get so often from inside the church and also from our culture, this picture of this angry God who sits up in heaven waiting to take all the fun out of our lives and who derives pleasure out of sending sinners to hell. But Christmas shows us a very different picture. Christmas shows us the God who, rather than wanting to be angry at us or punish us, Christmas shows us the God who enters into our lives to be with us. And what that means is that God, in each of the instances that I pointed out, God saw his people's pain. God enters into our anxiety. God enters into our loneliness. God enters into the things that we carry when we can't do it anymore. God enters into that. Now, sympathy is good. Anytime I'm in a rough place and somebody wants to be sympathetic, I'll take that. That is so much better than suck it up. But God goes a step further. God goes beyond sympathy to empathy. And the reason that God can be empathetic with our situation is because God became a human being. And so everything you feel, Jesus can say, I've been there. It's not just an academic, I've read about that. Jesus knows what it's like to be lonely. Jesus knows what it's like to be at the end of your rope. Jesus knows what it's like to be out of money. Jesus knows what it's like when your friends talk badly about you. Jesus knew FOMO. Other people did fun things that he didn't get to do. Jesus knew all of that. It's one of the glories of 12-step programs like a Celebrate Recovery that we have here, is you get a bunch of people together who are empathetic because they've been there. God is empathetic because he's been there. And God is present with us through the difficult times to redeem our lives. And as we heard over and over again through the Advent stories that we listened to put us into a community that is being transformed, that is in the process of transforming our world. We have a tendency to think that it's just me and Jesus. But it is never just about me and Jesus. It's always about me and Jesus and the community that Jesus puts me into and the community that God is building among us. And Jesus most frequently makes himself present with us through the community of Christ. One of the things that I'm so grateful for is the genuine warmth of the people in our congregation. I'd like to think that what we produce on a Sunday morning is enough to keep people coming. But it's not. You can get way better online. You can get better preaching. You can get better music. You can get better production values. You can get way better online. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're not going to give up. And we're going to keep producing excellence in the way that we can. But you can get better online. It's just true. But what you can't get is the community. And that's where we come in. I was reading the other day that younger people are looking for a place to meet other people and to belong where they don't have to spend $16 for a drink. I thought that's just the reality. You know, where are you going to go that you don't have to spend $16 for a drink just to be around other people? And it was in that context of we can provide a community where, heck, I think coffee's only $1.50 and you can get it free if you want to on this end. Maybe you don't know that. And I hear stories all of the time of people who can go to a church and they're like, man, the music was great. I liked the pastor. It seemed like a great place, but no one spoke to me. Everybody was having a good time and I stood there alone. Now, that can happen here too, because we're not perfect. We have people who honk at each other in the parking lot. We have people who don't notice other people. We aren't perfect, but we're trying. And I'm so proud of you all, because one of the fruits of our labor together, one of the fruits of taking the gospel seriously, is people like Chase. Chase has this transformation story because we created a place where he felt included. We created a place where he felt like he belonged, and he met Jesus here. And that's an integral part of the mission that Jesus has given us, is to create a community and to invite people into it. Because ultimately, we're not a country club where we just gather with our friends for a good time. There's this great verse in Romans 15:7 where Paul writes, "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." Now, when we think about welcoming people, when we think about including people, I think sometimes we have the tendency to think of all the people we don't think should be welcomed or included. But let's save that for another sermon. Today, just look at the people that God sends to you. Look at your neighbors. Look at your family. Look at your friends. Look at the people who sit next to you in church that you don't know. And God calls us to extend welcome to them. God calls us to create a place where people feel like they can belong. And it's not as hard as you would think it is. So many of you are so good at it. We had a guy come and visit the church probably a month ago, and he hadn't been to church for years. He did a dry run. He ran into some people who took 30 minutes with him and just stood and talked to him. And then he came to church on Sunday morning, and at the end of the day, he cried because he said, "I was talked to by so many people." There's one dude who came by himself, seeking God, didn't know what he was looking for, but he found it here because you people stopped and you talked to him and you included him and you made him feel welcome. And it can be awkward. I mean, I have this thing. This is what I do. Here, I'll tell you this. When I see somebody that I don't know, I always say, "Have we met?" And lots of times the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is, "Yes, we had a conversation last week." And I'm like, sorry, I'm a loser. I mean, it can be awkward, but mostly you just need to build a bridge and get over it. Because most of the time people are like, "Yeah, we talked for just a second, but I don't expect you to remember me." I mean, people tend to be very gracious. That's all you need to say. Have we met? And you don't need to be best friends. You just need to be genuine. Because any genuine interaction says, "I see you, I notice you, I'm glad you're here." And that can make a difference in the lives of people. Moving from disconnected to connected. And we get to be a part of that process. We're living in a country, we talked about at the beginning, we all know this in our hearts, that's suffering from an epidemic of loneliness. But we have a different story that we live into. Because the story that we have reminds us that God comes into our lives, that God is with us, that God includes us, that God walks through the difficult times and the pains of our life. And that's the glory of Christmas. And sometimes all it takes to communicate that is a small gesture of welcome and a friendly face. Now, if you're sitting here, like I said, we're not perfect. But if you are one of those people that are not feeling connected, you're not as connected as you would like, we'll be talking about connections after the first of the year. But there's a couple things that I can offer to you. First of all, find a position of service. There's no better way to connect with people than to serve alongside of them. Join a small group. Or seriously, Chase talked a lot about vulnerability. Talk to one of the pastoral team and say, "You know what? We're trying really hard to be connected and we just don't feel connected. Would you help us?" And we would be thrilled to do that.
Hi, thanks for watching. The people of Harbor Covenant Church really want you to know the love that God has for you, want to grow with you in faith, and want to serve alongside you, not only to help others do the same, but also to make our families and our communities better. If that sounds like something that you can get on board with, then like, follow, and drop us a comment in the video. Watch some more videos on our channel or come visit us on Sunday. You can find out more about Harbor Covenant Church at harborcov.church.